Howdy my totally always Tubular gamers, we're back with, you guessed it, another video. Thanks for coming back to the channel. If you're new here, maybe stick around for a while. I got a fun video for you. Today we're going to be talking about next gen only game. Now tell me if you've heard this one before. There's no new games only on the PS5 or the Xbox Series X. There's no reason to upgrade. Every major release is still releasing on the PS4. There's really just no next-gen games. The last-gen consoles are really getting almost every single release, and you know, to an extent, they're right. It feels like almost every game that comes out these days comes out for PS4 and PS5, and it doesn't feel like there's a bunch of new games taking advantage of this new hardware. And you know, it makes sense. Sony themselves said that like half of PlayStation's users are still playing on PS4. They haven't upgraded, and so that's what today's video is all about. I'm going to be doing a list of the 15 best games you can't play on your last-gen system. This list is not in any particular order, it's just 15 great games you can't play on your PS4 or your Xbox One. I'm not going to be looking at any re-releases, no remakes, none of that. I want totally fresh, new experiences, and yeah, here's 15 games that I think are worth upgrading for. As always, let me know down below how you're feeling about the video and some games you think I should check out. I'm always on the hunt for more games. I haven't played every game ever. Like, I don't have a Plague Tale Innocence on here. I still have yet to play it, but that is a next-gen only experience. I'm always lurking in the comments is what I'm saying. Please like, share, comment, subscribe. Any support is truly greatly appreciated. Seriously, thank you so much. You all truly are the best, so let's just get started with the first game on our list. And our first game is Returnal. Returnal was one of those first PS5 only games that truly did feel like a next-gen experience. And it really actually feels like this game is taking advantage of the hardware. I mean, graphically, it's a very good looking game. It's super smooth with its frame rate. I never had any issues or hiccups or anything like that. And the game loads crazy fast no matter where you're at. But the game being pretty and running fast doesn't mean it's a great game automatically. The gameplay and the story and all of that has to be good. And with Returnal, oh, it's actually very good. The story's really interesting, where it's about this space explorer named Celine as she crash lands onto this planet and has to basically repeat everything she does every time she dies. It's very much like Groundhog Day, and she's trying to break this loop. She doesn't know how long she's been in it, she just knows she needs to get out of it. The story starts interesting, and it only gets more and more intriguing as you play through and learn a lot of things about Celine as a person. There's a lot of foreshadowing and metaphors, and it's very good when it comes to the story, the atmosphere, the world, and Celine is a very interesting character, and the gameplay is also quite interesting. There's really not any other game like it. It's a big budget AAA roguelike, and not only is it a roguelike, it's a super fast-paced third-person shooter bullet hell as well. It very much is not what Sony usually puts out, which is a game for everybody. This is definitely not for everybody. It is a quite challenging game. Like, you will be tested in this game. It actually can get pretty difficult, especially if you're not getting very good drops. But it doesn't really matter what kind of drops you get. The game has a certain baseline difficulty to it that will always keep you on your toes. But the third-person shooting and the combat in general is very frantic, it's fast, and it's good. You're constantly engaged, everything is challenging you. You got this environment that is ready to tear you apart, and then just tons of enemies all over the place. Celine feels great, the gameplay is great, it's got a really good length to it, it's incredibly replayable since it's a roguelike. They've been updating it over the years. They even added multiplayer and like this tower of challenges. I actually quite like Returnal. It's one of my favorite PS5 games. It looks great, it plays great, it's got really solid gameplay, and it's just different from almost every other experience out there. I can't wait to see what the studio does in the future. If it's anything like Returnal, it's going to be good. And here we have Tekken 8. Tekken 8 is really the first fighting game that very much feels like a next-gen fighting game, taking full advantage of the next generation of hardware. I mean, Mortal Kombat 1 looks really great, but it's also on PS4. Somehow it's on the Switch. I didn't say it was any good on the Switch, but it's even on the Switch. Tekken 8 though really feels like it's taking advantage of everything. I mean, this is like the greatest looking fighting game ever, at least so far. The graphics are incredible for this game. The character models, the animation, the stages, it just looks phenomenal. It is absolutely a graphical powerhouse. Like, it looks crazy good, and then it actually plays crazy good as well. I have been a long time Tekken fan, really my entire life, and this gameplay really might be the best Tekken gameplay of them all. Like, some of the other Tekken games have amazing gameplay, like Tekken 7, Tekken 5, even Tekken 3 is still really good, but Tekken 8, ooh, this feels so good. They really do promote aggressive play here. and it just feels phenomenal. The controls are, dare I say, perfect. Like, all of the characters are super different from each other. They have these crazy big movesets that sometimes go back like 20 years. Like, every character has so many different moves, and then it all just feels so good. I really love the fighting gameplay of Tekken 8, and then the game actually has a decent amount of content to it as well, with like these little story modes for each character, a full-time actual story mode with cutscenes and everything that is a decent length to it, solid online, and then a few mini games thrown in there like Tekken Ball. So the content was really solid. I do know though that, yeah, later on they did add this battle pass as a feature, air quotes. There's a bunch of DLC. You gotta buy all the characters. My man Eddie Gordo, my main, is freaking DLC, but you know, I think that's just kind of the nature of fighting games, unfortunately, at this point. If you're looking for a next-gen fighting game, look no further than Tekken 8. Even if you're not huge on like 3D fighting games, Tekken's a little different. If you're someone who's looking for that real next-gen fighting experience though, Tekken 8 absolutely is that game. I love Street Fighter 6, I even like Mortal Kombat 1, but they are available on PS4 and Xbox One respectively. Tekken 8, it really does take advantage of that hardware, and Unreal Engine 5, which again, just looks phenomenal. And so here we have a double header. We have Final Fantasy 16 and Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth. Right now they're both exclusive to PS5. I'm sure that will change, and both absolutely take advantage of the hardware. These are some of the best looking games for the console, and are, in my opinion, some of the best Final Fantasy games of the last like decade. They both are really must-play experiences if you have a PS5. I know 16 has plenty of doubters and people who don't like the combat or the story or how it's kind of linear, but I mean, we all like Rebirth, right? Everybody loves Final Fantasy 7. Rebirth, it is the better game in my opinion, but I'm not going to discount 16 because of that. I think 16, it looks great. It has some really solid gameplay. Yeah, it is much more like a hack and slash than a traditional RPG, but I think the combat's good, and I think the story above all else is just fantastic. I love the story of Clive and his brother, and it's really emotional, and it really hit me in the feels. I think that it's just a fantastic story that absolutely props the game up. It's got a really good length to it. It's even got some DLCs now. 16, it's a pretty good game in my opinion. And then 7 Rebirth is just phenomenal. It's one of the best open world games. It's one of the best RPGs I've ever played. The combat is fantastic. The story is just exceptional. There's tons of mini games. Sure, not all of them are great, but there's tons of variety here. You go to a bunch of different areas. The pacing is really solid. It's a lot better than the Final Fantasy 7 remake in my opinion. They are always keeping things interesting. The music in both games, actually, the music is just absolutely superb. They both are great games. They're both some of the best action RPGs you could play nowadays. If you've ever really been a fan of Final Fantasy, then I think both games are worth playing, even if they are, you know, drastically different from the older games. Final Fantasy evolves, it changes. I don't really care too much as long as it's good, and I think both games are good. Final Fantasy's also been a graphical powerhouse from the PS1 days to the PS2 days, even the PS3 games, and it's no different here. It absolutely takes advantage of the hardware, and you can't play this on your PS4. It looks just a little too good. I'm sure these games will come to PC and possibly Xbox sooner than later, but either way, if you have a PS5, I totally think it's worth trying these games. And so our next game was the rare Xbox only next gen game, but now it's even on PS5, and that is Hi-Fi Rush. Unfortunately, the studio behind Hi-Fi Rush, Tango Gameworks, was shut down by Microsoft for seemingly no good reason, but even before they were shut down, I was praising this game to all hell, and I will continue to because it's a fantastic game. Does it really take advantage of that next-gen hardware? Probably not. I mean, graphically, the game looks very good. It has a great look and aesthetic and vibe to it. I mean, the cell shading looks phenomenal. It's one of the best-looking cell-shaded games ever, and thanks to that, it's probably going to age incredibly well. But I wouldn't say, you know, takes full advantage of the next-gen hardware. This probably would work just fine on PS4, but it's not on PS4, it's not on Xbox One, it's only on the next-gen consoles, and it's one of the best games for those consoles. It sees our main man Chai going up against this evil corporation for reasons I really don't want to share actually. The story's really great, the characters are solid enough, they're all incredibly likable. Like, this is just a fun bunch of characters that you really come to enjoy actually, and it's one of my favorite parts of the story. And when it comes to the gameplay, it really is a mix of a character action game like a hack and slash and a rhythm game. I'm surprised this hasn't really been done before, but here it is and it's awesome. The whole game moves to a beat, and it's really cool to see that the entire world is actually moving to the beat, and then your combos and the combat in general should be done to the beat as well. You can of course not do it to the beat, but the game really does reward you if you do it to the beat. You do more damage, you get more points, you get a better rank. There's plenty of incentives, and what's great is I believe really anybody can get in rhythm with this game. I am horribly out of rhythm, out of tune, whatever you want to call it, and after like an hour or two, even I was getting in rhythm with this game and starting to actually get pretty good, and it really clicked with me and became a ton of fun. It's one of my favorite character action games of the last few years, easy. The combat is fast, rewarding, and satisfying above all else, especially when you get really in tune with everything. The bosses are great, the pacing and the length are really solid here. Sure, it's not the longest game in the world, but it's a very strong like 10 hours, and it's all killer, no filler here. Like, you're going to different environments constantly. What you're doing in 1 hour, you're not really doing the next hour. They constantly keep you engaged. There's a ton of awesome set pieces here, and it was just a good old-fashioned single-player game that is worth your time. Whether you're on PS5, PC, or the new Xbox, it's worth it. And so our next game is an interesting one. It is Alan Wake 2. Alan Wake 2 is only on the next-gen consoles and PC, and it absolutely does take advantage of that next-gen hardware. This is a phenomenal-looking game that at times looks like real life. Sometimes it literally is real life, and they just blend the two. Alan Wake 2, it's kind of hard to describe this game in a few minutes. It is a sequel to Alan Wake, and you very much do want to play the first Alan Wake to really understand what the hell is going on here, but even if you play the first one, it still is pretty confusing at times. It sees you playing as Alan, who's stuck in the dark place, and another character known as Saga, who's trying to figure out what the hell's going on in this loony forest and just kind of crazy town. The story is wild in this game. It's all over the place. It's confusing on purpose at times, and piecing everything together, it's pretty awesome. I think it's a very good story. It's clearly not for everybody, and some people, you know, it just doesn't really click with them, but it clicked with me. I enjoyed it. I think the characters are great. It's really interesting, and I was constantly just going, what is going on, man? Where is this going? And it wasn't in a bad way either. I really was intrigued, and I wanted to see what was going to happen. It's a good thing too, because this is longer than your average survival horror game, taking around 20-25 hours. And yes, for the gameplay, it pretty much is a survival horror game. It's more comparable to, say, Resident Evil 8 than anything else, where you have to manage your inventory, you get a bunch of weapons, you solve some puzzles, and you're just kind of going around in these somewhat open areas. It's not super linear, but it's definitely not an open world. There's just kind of open areas you can explore. There are side missions to do here that add even more lore and context to everything that I think are worth doing. The game is quite slow with its pacing. I've heard some people dislike the pacing and how it really does take its time. It's one of those slow burns, and you know, at first I was a little hesitant also. I was like, I don't know, man, that's really long for a horror game. Is it going to get kind of boring? But no, they really find ways to keep it interesting, and even though you go to only the same few environments, like, these are some really good looking environments. And they change things up enough, in my opinion, to keep things really interesting. I really like the puzzles of this game, especially when you're Alan. I thought these were particularly a highlight, and the combat, while it is pretty basic, it's still decent enough. It's serviceable, and then to top it all off, this game has a ton of references to several other Remedy games. If you've played them, you know what I'm talking about, more than just the original Alan Wake, which is pretty cool. This is a very unique game. It's, again, clearly not for everybody. I know not everybody is going to enjoy this type of game. Not even every kind of survival horror fan is going to enjoy this type of game. But if you are looking for a next-gen horror experience, I think this is one game that you should check out. It is also decently scary. I will say that. It got me plenty of times, and I thought it was a hell of a lot scarier than the first game. And here we have Deathloop. It's kind of easy to forget, but Deathloop was actually a PS5 exclusive for a while, but nowadays it's available on the Series X, PS5, and PC, and I think it's a good next-gen game. I mean, do I think it takes full advantage of the hardware? Probably not. I mean, it has a good style and aesthetic to it, but it's not the most graphically intensive game, but I still think it looks good, and again, I do like the style this game has. It's not photorealistic, and it tries to go for something a little different, and I can appreciate it. I also know, like Alan Wake 2, this game is very much not for everybody. There are plenty of people that don't really care for Deathloop and think it's a huge step back from Dishonored, and while I think this game does have some flaws, I still think it is a relatively good game. Seeing our main man Colt stuck in this time loop of sorts, he has to kill these individuals in order to get the hell out of it, and there's this woman named Juliana trying to stop him. The story is decently intriguing, but Colt and Juliana really steal the show here. Their banter and how they go back and forth are the highlight of the story. The characters are pretty solid here, but the story itself, yeah, it's just kind of okay. When it comes to the gameplay, it is quite similar to Arcane's other games. It is an immersive sim, complete with stealth, first-person shooting, and multiple ways to go about your objective. Your objective is to kill these individuals, and that's really your only objective. How you do it is up to you, but unfortunately at the end of the day, there's really only one way to kill everyone in one go. And there's plenty of secrets, things to see, places to explore. In fact, investigating around the world is actually some of the most fun. There's also PvP where Juliana shows up to try to kill you, and you can turn this off, but I really recommend you don't. I think it creates a much more engaging, tense experience, and it will certainly extend the runtime. Without that, the game's probably around 10 to 15 hours, but it is a really well-paced 10 to 15 hours. With all the PvP and exploring, you could probably get a solid like 20 or so hours out of it. Is it the best immersive sim Arcane's made? No. Does it have flaws? Yes. Well, I think the weapon selection, the powers, the combat, and the guns in general are good. The immersive sim elements definitely are a little lacking. Like, this game was really sold to us as kind of being like Hitman, where you can take out each target in a variety of different ways, but if you want to kill everyone and break the loop, it has to be done in a very specific way that's incredibly linear, shockingly linear actually, and that's never really sat well with me. But despite that, I still think Deathloop is a good game. I still think it is worth playing, and it's different enough from the average shooter or stealth game. And so here's a game I'm sure you're all very familiar with because I've talked about it several times, and that is Marvel's Spider-Man 2. At the moment, it is only on PS5. I'm sure it'll come to PC sooner than later, but it is one of those rare next-gen exclusives, and I think it definitely takes advantage of the hardware. I mean, the game loads like instantaneously. It's able to load just this massive open world with really no issues at all. The game looks pretty good. And then it ran incredibly well also. Does it look a ton better than, say, Miles Morales? No, probably not, but I still think it is a really good looking game. And then when it comes to the gameplay, it is absolutely that open world Spider-Man gameplay you've come to know and love, where you get to swing around all over the place or fly also. The wingsuit's really great in this game. In fact, the traversal is just fantastic, and you get to stop crime. There's plenty of main missions, side missions, and yeah, it does reuse most of the map, but I mean, it's New York. I don't really know how they're going to add all that much to the map, but I think it is a very well designed open world. It feels very alive. There's a lot of density and things going on. It's a good open world. It's probably the best New York open world ever in a game. It looks great. The gameplay's really solid. The combat's great. The story, I quite like the story where it's really about Peter and Miles working together. I know not everybody loves it, but I think it's cool. Venom's cool. The open world activities are great. It's got a good length to it, probably over 30 or 40 hours if you want to do everything. Those stupid little mini games everybody hates is here, and as always, I gotta flex that I was part of the game's production until Insomniac let me go, unfortunately. Thank you, budget cuts. Anyway, Spider-Man 2, it is one of those next-gen only experiences that, yeah, definitely worth getting if you're a fan of Spider-Man or superhero games. And so from one super familiar game to the next, we have a game I've talked about several times, and that is Baldur's Taint 3. Now, Baldur's Taint 3 obviously was on PC first in early access for many years, and when it officially hit 1.0, it was a PC-only game for a few months, but eventually it did come to PS5 and the Xboxes, and it's not available on previous gen. You ain't playing Baldur's Taint 3 on your PS4, and do I think this is like a true next-gen experience that really takes advantage of the hardware? No, probably not. I mean, it's been in development for many years before the PS5 was even out. But at the very least, I think it is still a good looking game. Sure, it doesn't look phenomenal, it's not going to blow you away, but all the character models look good. There's a bunch of unique ones here, the environments look nice, I think the game has a nice aesthetic to it, and it runs pretty well on PC. I've heard it's actually very good when it comes to the console port as well. Something I do want to really highlight also is that this game is great with a controller. Whether you're playing with mouse and keyboard or controller, the interface is like phenomenal. I know that might sound silly to say, but I have played so many games, especially recently, with such shitty UI that Baldur's Gate 3 really is a breath of fresh air. I think the UI is very good here. It is very controller friendly. And when it comes to this game, I mean, we've talked about this game so many times. Everybody's talking about Baldur's Taint 3. It's a fantastic turn-based D&D style RPG where you create your own character, your background and your traits and stats, and all of that is super important actually. And basically you get this mind flayer of things stuck in your head and you got to figure out how to get it out. You're joined by several companions that are some of the best companions you'll find in any video game with so much backstory and character, and their personalities are just great. Seriously, some of these companions are just amazing. And when it comes to the gameplay, it is a turn-based D&D style RPG that plays very much like that, where you take turns, you miss a ton of times, and your characters level up quite slowly, but when they level up, it actually does mean a lot. The gameplay is phenomenal, the quests are great, it really understands D&D and just how much loony, ridiculous shit can go on. If you can think of a solution to a problem, you can probably do it here. You are just given so many tools at your disposal, and you can use all of them. There are so many different ways to go about every single quest, everything you do. There's tons of different ways to go about it, especially depending on your class, and I've just never seen so many different options for legit everything. I think the combat is good, I think the questing is good. While there isn't open worlds here, there is like pretty non-linear areas you can explore. I think all of that's good. The pacing's great. I love the third act. I don't know what people are talking about when they say it falls off. I think the third act is great. It has a strong conclusion, and it really is one of the greatest RPGs, no, just one of the greatest games ever made. It's probably the best game of this entire list, and if you haven't played it at this point, I really don't know what you're waiting for. Like, it doesn't really seem to get all that cheap, and you won't regret it. It has so much content to it, a ton of replayability. Even if you don't like turn-based games, I think you'll like this one. It truly is incredible. And so here's a game I haven't talked a ton about, and that is Jedi Survivor, which came out last year for next-gen consoles and PC. Do I think this game takes full advantage of the next-gen hardware? I guess. I mean, the thing about Jedi Survivor is that it just kind of runs like shit everywhere. Whether you've got a crazy good PC, a PS5, Xbox, it doesn't really matter. This game, it was horribly optimized when it was released. It's a little better now, but it still kind of sucks when it comes to stability and optimization, and so I couldn't imagine a last-gen version of this game. It'd probably run even worse and look even worse. This game actually does look pretty decent. The environments are nice, the character models are good, and sometimes the frame rate is pretty good. Sometimes. When it comes to the story, it is a direct sequel to Jedi Fallen Order and really follows Cal Kestis, and he's one of the most likable Star Wars characters in the last decade. Like, say what you will about the TV shows and the movies and all of that, but Cal, he's a good one. He's pretty awesome in this game, and I think his character arc is pretty decent. The game overall, when it comes to its story and characters and world building, I think is pretty decent. It's not the very best a Star Wars game has ever had, but I liked it for what it was, and I'm just happy that it's even good at all. When it comes to the gameplay, it really is an expansion on Jedi Fallen Order, where it kind of is like a Star Wars Souls-like, only with a bunch more platforming and bigger, better worlds. Instead of it being rather linear, you're dropped into pretty open worlds. I mean, it's not massive open worlds, but very big open areas complete with side missions and a ton of things to do. Cal's moveset is actually pretty awesome. You get to customize your lightsaber. There's a bunch of different stances here. He can double jump and wall run, and the level design is very vertical, filled with tons of platforming, and it actually does feel pretty nice. This game's feel and controls are very well done. And then when it comes to the combat, I think it's quite good as well. It really is an expansion on what the previous game had. It isn't really all that difficult, especially if you've played really any other Souls-likes, but it still has a little bit of a challenge to it. Fighting the enemies can be tricky at times. A lot of them have different patterns, and a few of the bosses can certainly keep you on your toes, but I think the combat is still good. Again, there's different lightsaber stances, which I think is actually really cool. Some of them are drastically different from the other ones, like the one where you have a blaster with you. That's pretty cool. The combat's satisfying, the platforming's good, the exploration's solid, the pacing's good. It's got a decent length to it, 20 hours. I'd say it lives up to being the first real next-gen Star Wars experience. It's also kind of the only one right now, and I'm sure there'll be more in the future. But regardless, this is a good one that you should totally check out if you like Star Wars. It also finally came to Game Pass, so if you've got that, yeah, totally worth trying. And our next game is Ghostwire Tokyo, which, like Deathloop, was actually exclusive to PS5 for a good year, but it's on everything now. And I feel like this game was kind of forgotten about. It was also developed by Tango Gameworks, who made Hi-Fi Rush, and I mean, Hi-Fi Rush is the one that certainly got all the attention versus this game, and that's a shame because I actually think Ghostwire Tokyo is a good game. Do I think it's a great game? Do I think it's one of the best horror games of the last decade? Do I think it's better than Evil Within? No, I don't think that, but I still think it is a good, spooky experience that is pretty different from most games out there. It actually is an open world game set in a realistic Tokyo, and I gotta say, it is kind of weird to see a realistic Tokyo that isn't a Yakuza game, but I really like the Tokyo in this game. I think it's well designed and it looks great. The graphics in general were pretty good. They're not amazing, they're not spectacular, they're not going to blow your freaking mind, but I think it looks pretty good, and the frame rate was very solid throughout. It probably takes advantage of the PS5 and Series X hardware. But part of me still feels like this could have probably ran on a PS4, maybe in like a more compromised state or like at 30 FPS. Regardless, the game looks and runs well. The story's pretty interesting with like everyone basically disappearing and all these ghosts showing up, and you're just trying to figure out what the hell's going on. It's a spooky enough tale, and speaking of spooky, well, I don't think this game is like crazy scary and it doesn't have a bunch of jump scares. It really does have a spooky, tense atmosphere throughout, especially when you're exploring around. And whenever you get into combat with the not Slendermen, these guys can really kick your shit in also. The combat in this game is really interesting. It kind of reminds me of Naruto, where you summon elements to come help you fight off these monsters. And I mean, the combat is decent enough. It's not particularly satisfying, but it gets the job done. The open world is decently designed. There's a lot, and I mean a lot of collectibles here that I didn't really care all that much for. The pacing in this game is also just kind of meh, and I kind of felt like this one dragged on a little bit, but I still can appreciate again what it was trying to do. It does have a tense atmosphere, it has a different kind of story and gameplay, and it certainly was memorable. It didn't feel like that cookie cutter generic open world, and the activities you do in it did feel relatively different from most games. Did I love every second of it? No, I didn't, but I still liked it enough to the point where I could recommend it if you like horror games or if you're looking for a different kind of experience that is next gen only. And here we have RoboCop Rogue City. Before I made this list, I didn't even realize this one was next gen only. I thought it was on PS4 and Xbox One, but nope, it's PS5, Series X, and PC only. And does it take advantage of the hardware? I'd say for the most part it really does. This is actually a pretty good looking game considering how small the team and budget is as well. I mean, RoboCop looks great, the environments look very good. The other character models, yeah, not so much, but at least the frame rate was pretty stable throughout. Now, RoboCop Rogue City is definitely one of the best first-person shooters I've played in the last 5 to 10 years, especially if we take out all the boomer shooters in terms of actual modern shooters. It's one of the best ones I've played in the last decade. This game is awesome. They actually completely understood the assignment of what a RoboCop game should be, where you're just kind of dropped into these environments and told to just annihilate everything, and it's incredibly gory, visceral, meaty, and just crunchy combat. You get these weapons that just completely destroy people. Like, we're talking just explode their guts all over the place. The weapons are crazy satisfying. The gunplay is some of the most satisfying gunplay I've ever had in a video game. It feels so good. It's unbelievable how good the gunplay feels, like truly. The gunplay and general combat alone makes this game worth playing. You can even upgrade RoboCop and get new abilities for him and stuff, and the combat just becomes even better. I mean, you even get bullet time here, and the environments you're dropped into are pretty decent as well, and the AI aren't dumb as shit either. I mean, they're not going to really put up a ton of challenge, but they're not just standing targets either. The combat, it really is good. When it comes to everything else, yeah, it's pretty good. Also, the story follows RoboCop going after some new criminals, and then you go through these somewhat open areas. I mean, some parts of the game are relatively linear, but you're dropped into other more open areas where you can do side quests, and throughout the game you're actually given choices, and your choices really do matter. They can affect the ending, RoboCop's relationship with plenty of other characters, and I did not expect this to be in the game, let alone well implemented, but it's decent enough here. This game is honestly kind of underrated, and if you like first-person shooters and you're looking for a next-gen FPS, oh, RoboCop is so good. Do not let the fact that it's RoboCop distract you. This is not some garbage license game. I will praise this game forever because I just had so much fun with it, and the combat, the gunplay just feels so good. And so here's a newer game for the list, and that is Stellar Blade, recently releasing on PS5, but will come to PC at some point. Stellar Blade certainly might not be the most original game, but it actually is a pretty good game. The way everything comes together makes for a relatively enjoyable experience. You play as Eve, who is sent to Earth by the humans to defeat these monsters that have basically taken over the entire planet. They took over and then sent the rest of the humans into space, and the humans are like, nah, fuck that, we're taking the Earth back. The story in this game, yeah, it's not particularly very good. The characters aren't really all that likable outside of Eve, and it's just crazy predictable, and it's kind of hard to really care all that much about the story. At least the game's pretty. It does look very good at times. I mean, the character models are kind of all over the place, and they look like they belong in different games, but Eve looks very good. All of her outfits look really good, I'll give her that. That's certainly taking advantage of the PS5 powers the outfits and the character models. When it comes to the gameplay, I'd say it's a mix of a character action game and a Souls-like, where you can do tons of fancy combos and actually get some pretty decently long strings going, but there's plenty of dodge rolling and other Souls-like mechanics. But this game certainly promotes aggressive play. They really want you to just go in on these enemies, and the combat, yeah, it's actually really good. It's really fun, it's challenging at times, and it can be incredibly satisfying. You can do some pretty cool looking shit, and a lot of the game is parrying. And when you parry in this game, it feels really good. Like, this is some of the most satisfying parrying I've had from any game, especially with that haptic feedback. Like, that shit feels good. That's like the main focus of the combat, is parrying and just destroying your enemies. Outside of that, you're exploring these relatively open areas. There are some linear parts, but some parts are open and they give you some other side content to do that is unfortunately not very good in my opinion. It was just a little too cookie cutter and generic. I mean, the stories in them weren't awful, but I didn't really care for the side content. But there's plenty of side content to do here. The game has a decent length of 20 to 30 hours. If you do the side content, probably like 40 hours. And I like that it's not this massive 50, 60, 100 hour RPG. It knows when to end, and I think the game actually is a good pace throughout. It keeps things interesting. You go to different environments. There's plenty of set pieces, a ton of interesting boss fights. I think Stellar Blade is a pretty good time. Oh, and the music absolutely slaps. The music is just amazing. It's seriously really good. It helps the vibe and aesthetic out a lot. And while I wouldn't say it brings a ton of original ideas to any of the genres it borrows from, it still all comes together in a cohesive, fun experience that, yeah, it's probably worth your time. Alright, we've got at least one next-gen only driving game, and that is Need for Speed Unbound. I did not realize this was a next-gen only title until I was doing research for this video, but yeah, this game is not on PS4 or Xbox One, and I mean, yeah, it does actually look pretty good. The cars look really excellent, like the city looks good, and the frame rate was really solid throughout. Do I think they could have had a PS4 version of this? I think they probably could have had a PS4 version of this, but they didn't, and yeah, it's a next-gen only racing game, and I really think it's one of the best Need for Speed games in the last decade. Do I think it's as good as Heat nowadays? Probably not, but if you're looking for a modern, fun arcade racer, yeah, I think you're definitely going to be happy with this one. I'd much rather play this game than Payback or that stupid reboot. I actually did enjoy my time with this game. It has a pretty unique art style as well, where the car effects and character models are very, I'll just say, anime, and I actually really like this. It gives the game a personality, some charm. It makes it look different. I mean, racing games are pretty much homogenized when it comes to how they look, so anything going outside of the norm, I can appreciate. I certainly think it looks cool. When it comes to the story, yeah, it's that typical Need for Speed kind of hokey shit where there's two characters working for this mechanic, and then one of them betrays the mechanic and your character, and then it's a bit later, and there's a bunch of races that pop up, and you want to be the best. You know how these games go. The story is just kind of whatever. There's a good amount of dialogue in this game. Heard some people say it's woke Need for Speed. That's a hoot and a holler and a half in my opinion. It is certainly not that, but there is a decent amount of dialogue here. It can kind of get annoying how much there is, but it's not the end of the world. What matters is the driving. The driving is very good. It feels really nice. It uses what modern Need for Speed uses, where you double tap the trigger twice to do drifts, and I think it feels really good for the most part. This game has a really great progression as well. When you start the game, you're not all that fast, and you're not really winning these races either. It can actually be pretty difficult, but as you play through it, you upgrade your car gets better, you get a new car that's even better, and yeah, you'll be going real fast by the end of it. They really build up the speed, and I just thought the sense of progression was really good in this game. It's some of the best I've seen from the series, actually. They have this risk versus reward system where you do a bunch of races and get cash, and then you can bank it and it moves on to the night of that day where, like, you know, the police are more aggressive, yada yada. I don't think it's as good as Heat's risk versus reward system, but it's decent enough. The campaign's got a good length to it, taking well over 15 to 20 hours, which is pretty lengthy for a game like this. And yeah, it does kind of get repetitive by the end of it. I mean, the open world, it isn't amazing. It's a little bland and it looks a little bland at times, but it's fine for what it is. I enjoyed enough of my time to recommend it and still say if you like driving games, maybe if you haven't played a Need for Speed game in quite some time, I think you're going to enjoy this one. Is it going to remind you of the good old underground days? Probably not, but I still like it. Oh, and looking back, the music kind of sucks in this game. I mean, I get what they were going for, but I didn't care for it. We've almost wrapped things up. Here we have Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, which was one of the first PS5 only, next-gen only titles, and yeah, it absolutely was one of those games that took advantage of the PS5, specifically the SSD and the loading. where you go through basically these portals into different dimensions and worlds, and everything's loading instantly. There's like no load screens, everything's super fast, and it was impressive a few years ago. It's impressive now. The game looks incredible, and from a presentation standpoint, it's as close to perfect as it gets. Seriously, it looks really good. The frame rate's great. The character models are great. It looks like a Pixar movie. It's just truly excellent on that level. And when it comes to the gameplay, it very much is a Ratchet and Clank game. It feels like the last 10 Ratchet and Clank games, where it's a third-person shooter with some platforming. You get some cool weapons and you blow shit up. The platforming is pretty decent here. It's nothing mind-blowing, but it's alright. There's some cool set pieces, and then when it comes to the combat, yeah, it's pretty good. The weapons feel nice. It's relatively satisfying. A lot of the weapons are reused, unfortunately, but even the new ones that do show up here are still good, and I'd say it's some of the best combat the series has ever had. There's a bunch of other set pieces that show up, and you get to do other things here, and a bunch of other little mini games pop up, and yeah, these are nice distractions. It adds some variety. I'm not going to act like this is the best Ratchet and Clank gameplay of them all, but I did quite enjoy it. I also enjoyed the story. I liked Rivet, how she showed up. She's pretty good. Them all going up against Nefarious. Yeah, it was a good time. At times it feels a bit Saturday morning cartoon and like it's going to leave your head a few weeks later, but I enjoyed it for what it was. This is a good game, and if you haven't played it by now, it's getting pretty cheap. And so if you've ever played a Ratchet and Clank game or had any desire to play a AAA platformer, yeah, this is a good one. And so our last game is actually the latest game to come out, and that is Senua's Saga Hellblade 2. As of right now, this is an Xbox exclusive next-gen experience, but I'd be really surprised if it stays exclusive for even a few years. But the big question posed for Hellblade 2 is, does it take advantage of the next-gen hardware? Oh, it absolutely does. I will just say, Hellblade 2 is like the greatest looking game I've ever seen. And I mean game that is actually released, not like a mod or a tech demo or some kind of graphical showcase, an actual video game you can play from start to finish. This is the best looking game I've ever seen. It looks freaking incredible. It is stupidly good looking, from the character models to the facial animation to the environments to the frame rate to the weather effects. Literally everything about this game looks as real life. It is crazy good looking. I've just never seen a game with this much detail. And clearly that's where a bulk of the work went to. Like, everything just looks so ridiculously good in this game. I could be here for 20 minutes talking about how good this game looks, from the oceans to the other environment to Senua herself, the other characters. It just looks freaking incredible, and it runs pretty smooth also. It is 30 FPS on Xbox, but on PC it was 60, and yeah, it just looks incredible. As for the actual gameplay, there isn't a whole lot here, to be honest. I mean, a lot of the game is just walking forward, taking the world in, listening to characters, or getting from point A to B. You will solve some occasional puzzles, but these are relatively rudimentary. I mean, they're all super basic and easy. They're like as basic as the first games, if not even more basic at times, and the same could really be said for the combat. It looks incredible. It's all clearly choreographed, and the fights do look incredible, but the actual combat itself is super basic. Like, it is a bog standard hack and slash where you do light attack, heavy attack, and you can kind of parry, basically block and parry, and that's it. It never gets more complicated. There's no upgrade system, no skill points, no leveling up, nothing like that. It's really basic. How you fight the first enemy is really how you fight the last enemy, outside of powering up, which was also in the first game. The combat, it's even more basic than the first games, but it's fine. It gets the job done. It's clearly not the focus here. The gameplay is not the focus. The focus is the story about Senua and just her character arc in general. Other characters show up and they have their own little arcs and they help Senua, but it really is still all about Senua's character arc. And I'm not saying a thing about the story. With such a narrative focused game, I'm not saying anything other than I think it's very good. I think Senua is really interesting. The ending is a bit abrupt, but I can still appreciate the story for what it is. The gameplay, as basic as it is still fine. I mean, it doesn't have anything inherently wrong with it. The only thing is the game is pretty short. I mean, I finished it in like 5.5, maybe 6 hours, and I kind of wish there was a little bit more to it. At the very least, there's no filler here. It really is just all killer. The game certainly doesn't drag, I will say that. At the end of the day, though, it absolutely takes advantage of the next-gen hardware. It's next-gen only, and if you have an Xbox, I do think it is worth trying, even if you didn't play the original, but I still think the original is a little better and totally worth playing. Alright, that's it for today's video. Hope it was what you were looking for. That's 15 next-gen only games I think that are worth playing. Did I miss something? Let me know down below if you made it to this part of the video. Our secret code word is slime, as in the Dragon Quest character enemy. Yep, that's the code word we're going for. Why? I don't know. That's just what I'm feeling. Slime it is. So hope you all have a good Christmas. See you all later. Bye-bye now.